Let me ask you a question, not as a friend, but as a strategist. When you enter a room, what do people see? Do they feel your presence, or do they pass by like you were never there? Because here's the brutal truth. People don't see your soul, your values, or your potential. They see your posture, your energy, your certainty, and if you don't command the room will erase you. This isn't about arrogance, it's about awareness. In a world ruled by illusion, it's not the most virtuous who rise, it's the most convincing. And if you've been working hard, doing everything right, and still feel invisible, this video will explain why. More importantly, it will teach you how to stop waiting and start projecting the power you've always had inside. If you're ready to be seen, heard, and respected, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin.
Number 1.
Assume the throne of perception. First of all, picture the moment you cross a doorway into any space, be it a boardroom, a cafe, or your own living room after a long day. In that fraction of a second, dozens of eyes make silent calculations about who you are and how much space you deserve. Very soon after, those judgments begin shaping the opportunities you will or will not receive. This may feel unfair, yet Marcus Aurelius reminds us that the universe never asks our permission before arranging events. Therefore, the wise man studies the rules of perception instead of resenting them, then bends those rules toward virtue. To illustrate, remember Oprah Winfrey at her first television audition. Unbeknownst to the producers, her childhood was steeped in poverty and rejection, and her voice shook every time she felt overlooked. Nevertheless, she trained herself to sit taller, breathe deeper, and speak as though every syllable carried gold. Consequently, audiences sensed her authority long before ratings confirmed it. Thus, posture became prophecy. Likewise, when Leonardo da Vinci unveiled the Last Supper, patrons were stunned not only by the paint, but by the serene certainty with which he presented the canvas. Presence, not credentials, sealed their belief. Because of this, you must treat every entrance as a silent declaration. I am worth noticing, yet, and here is the Stoic twist. You do not shout, you embody, you do not exaggerate, you radiate, Epictetus urged. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. You do not flail to appear grand. You exert calm pressure on the air around you so that stillness itself becomes your banner. Imagine your body as a marble column, unyielding yet graceful, supporting an invisible roof of dignity that invites respect without begging for it. But then people ask, isn't this fake? Aren't we simply acting? Seneca answers that life resembles a play more than a debate. It is the role assigned to you that matters, not the length of the script. Acting, therefore, is not deception. It is disciplined participation in reality. Moreover, when you act with integrity, the performance reshapes the performer. Contemporary neuroscience confirms what the ancients suspected. Standing in a posture of strength lowers cortisol and elevates testosterone, even if you begin the act feeling nervous. The body signals the mind, and the mind answers, yes, that is who I am. Meanwhile, consider Steve Jobs strolling on stage in his trademark black turtleneck. He was not the sole engineer behind every chip inside an iPhone, yet he moved as though the future itself marched in his pocket. He spoke in deliberate pauses, letting anticipation swell until each phrase landed like a drumbeat. Investors leaned forward, journalists echoed, and consumers lined up overnight. Competitors with stronger technical resumes were ignored simply because they failed to project inevitable success. Presence preceded proof. Equally important is your internal dialogue, for perception is generated first within. If you cross a threshold telling yourself you are small, the shoulders cave, the eyes drift downward, and the voice flickers. Consequently, people mirror that hesitation. Conversely, assume the mantle of significance, and the body sets itself accordingly. Dr. Maya Angelou confessed that before delivering her inaugural poem at a presidential ceremony, her knees trembled. Nonetheless, she repeated a single line, "You belong here," until her body believed it. What you rehearse privately becomes what you broadcast publicly. Next, hone a triad of visible cues: pace, gaze, and silence. Pace. Walk neither too quickly nor too slowly. Move with deliberate inevitability. Gaze. Hold eye contact 1 heartbeat longer than custom. Signal unhurried confidence without veering into aggression. Silence. Master the golden pause after a key sentence. In that hush, your words echo louder than any shout. In other words, you broadcast certainty, not by increasing volume, but by increasing gravity. Furthermore, discipline your micro-expressions. A Stoic does not grant stage time to every emotion that drifts through the mind. He questions each visitor, then chooses the one that serves the moment. Therefore, when irritation flickers, replace it with stillness. When anxiety hums, ground it with measured inhalations. That self-command filters outward as authority. An authority people trust even before they understand why. Because of this deliberate curation, the room begins to reorganize around you. Chairs subtly swivel, conversation tempo adjusts, and questions aim in your direction. At that precise instant, reward attention with substance. Speak sparingly yet vividly, weaving metaphors that cling to memory like honey on stone. Marcus Aurelius compared life to a rippling stream, ever in motion, yet ever itself. Anchor your ideas with such images, and listeners will quote you long after the meeting ends. Undoubtedly, critics will accuse you of ego. Indeed, pride without virtue is empty brass. Yet humility without presence is wasted gold. Therefore, marry both, inner modesty and outer magnitude. Leonardo, Oprah, Jobs, Angelo. They did not apologize for their luminosity. They directed it toward creation, healing, or innovation. Likewise, your command of perception must culminate in contribution. Otherwise, it festers into vanity. To sum up, walking like a king is not about crowns or thrones. It is about a disciplined decision to broadcast the worth that already exists within you. Ultimately, when posture, gaze, silence, and word economy align, you send a signal that says, "I am anchored." People crave that anchor amid uncertainty, and they will tether their trust to you if you provide it consistently. Above all, remember that presence is practice. No one sustains perfect poise every minute. Seneca's letters reveal moments of frustration and self-doubt, yet he returned again and again to the posture of wisdom. Similarly, you will falter, but every time you notice slouching shoulders or a shallow breath, treat it as a bell of mindfulness. Straighten, inhale, and reassume the throne. In conclusion, assume the throne of perception not to dominate, but to demonstrate, showing what disciplined serenity looks like in a frantic era. Walk as though your steps carve pathways for others to follow. Speak as though truth itself has borrowed your tongue. And most importantly, inhabit your value with such unwavering conviction that the world can either rise to meet you or step aside. That is how a Stoic becomes visible in an age of noise. And that is how you begin ruling the only territory that ever truly mattered, yourself.
Number 2.
Confidence is a discipline, not a feeling. To begin with, most people misunderstand confidence. They think it's something you either have or don't, like height, or a deeper voice, or some magical trait you're born with. But the Stoic sees confidence not as a trait, but as a practice, a muscle of the mind. It is not something you feel your way into. It is something you act your way into. Marcus Aurelius never wrote about confidence as a mood. He wrote about clarity, about preparation, about living in alignment with nature and duty. That was his strength. Not boldness for its own sake, but self-trust built through self-discipline. And this is where most men fail. They wait to feel ready. They wait for the anxiety to vanish. They wait for a moment when doubt disappears and they can finally act from some perfect place of peace. That moment never comes, as Seneca reminds us. We are more often frightened than hurt. In other words, the fear is louder than the threat. And when you realize that, you begin to see confidence not as something you wait for, but as something you train, deliberately, patiently, repeatedly. What's more, real confidence isn't loud, it's not exaggerated, it doesn't need to be. In fact, the most confident men are often the most restrained. Think of the difference between a firecracker and a mountain. One makes noise and vanishes. The other says nothing and reshapes the world just by existing. Stoic confidence is not a flare of emotion. It is a gravitational force. It pulls others in, not by demanding attention, but by deserving it. Let's take a real example. Maya Angelou once confessed that she felt nervous before every public reading. But here's the key. She did not allow that emotion to define her. Instead, she turned the feeling into fuel. She rehearsed. She composed herself. She stood with presence. And the world called her confident. Not because she lacked fear, but because she never bowed to it. That is the Stoic path. Not the denial of emotion, but the mastery of it. So how is this confidence built? Through discipline. First, discipline of action. If you say you'll do something, you do it. If you believe something matters, you live by it. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Each small act of consistency is a vote for the man you're becoming. And with enough votes, that man appears, not magically, not instantly, but inevitably. You become what you repeatedly do. Next, discipline of emotion. This is what separates boys from men. The confident man does not let every emotion sway him. He doesn't need every room to like him. He doesn't crumble when misunderstood. He remains centered. And why? Because he remembers what he stands for. Because his self-worth is rooted in action, not approval. Seneca put it plainly, "He who is brave is free." Free from what? From the tyranny of emotional volatility, from the need to always feel good before doing what is right. Now consider another example. Denzel Washington. Watch how he walks, how he speaks. He's not in a rush. He doesn't fill silence with fluff. He pauses, he thinks, he chooses his words carefully, and people listen. Why? Because his energy says, "I belong here." He doesn't ask for attention, he commands it. Not with ego, but with grounded certainty. That is trained presence. That is Stoic poise. Additionally, true confidence includes accepting imperfection. Many men believe they must be flawless before they can be firm. But perfection is a lie. The Stoics knew this. They did not preach flawlessness. They preached progress, action, adaptation. The confident man is not the one who always knows. He's the one who keeps moving anyway, who acts from clarity, not certainty, who dares to look foolish without collapsing. Furthermore, confidence is communicated through behavior. You broadcast belief through how you stand, how you breathe, how you respond to challenge. If your shoulders sag, if your voice trembles, if your eyes dart to the floor, you send a message. Whether you mean to or not, people hear it. Conversely, when you walk into a room with stillness, when your voice lands with weight, when your silence is deliberate, people feel something. Often they can't name it, but they respect it. And that's the paradox. You don't need to be the smartest, the best looking, the most accomplished, but you do need to act like someone who belongs. Confidence isn't about proving, it's about knowing. Even if that knowledge is built brick by brick, day by day, what matters is that it's yours. And once you have it, you never let the world take it away just because the world is confused about your worth. Let me say something that will sound harsh, but it's true. People do not treat you based on your potential. They treat you based on your presentation. If you doubt yourself, the room will mirror it. If you shrink, people will step over you. But if you carry yourself with poise, with presence, with quiet intensity, people will feel it, even if they don't understand it. Even if they don't agree with it, they'll feel it, and that's enough. Confidence is not a costume you put on. It's the outer expression of inner order. And it must be maintained daily, like the Roman Stoics cleaned their armor, polished their virtues, reviewed their actions. You must also return to center every single day. You must check your posture, your tone, your assumptions. You must correct the small slips before they become identity. To wrap things up, confidence is a discipline. It is not the absence of fear. It is the response to fear. It is not a feeling. It is a series of consistent choices. You choose to stand tall. You choose to speak slowly. You choose to follow through. And eventually the world responds. Not to your doubts, not to your history, but to your energy. And in a noisy world, energy aligned with principle becomes power. So do not wait to feel confident. Walk the path of discipline. Let your actions speak louder than your thoughts. Let your presence declare who you are before your words ever try to explain it. And never forget, confidence is not a performance for others. It is a daily promise to yourself.
Number 3.
Assumption is authority. At first glance, it may seem strange, perhaps even arrogant, to assume power before anyone gives it to you. But here's what most people never realize. The world doesn't assign authority based on merit. It responds to assumption. You walk into a room believing you are invisible, and the world will gladly confirm that belief. But if you enter with the silent conviction that you belong, something strange begins to happen. People respond to you before they understand why. That's not magic, that's human psychology, and the Stoics knew it well. To put it differently, assumption is not arrogance. It's a signal. It's how you tell the world how to treat you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When you assume weakness, you begin to speak, move, and breathe in a way that invites dismissal. But when you assume strength, not bravado, but quiet certainty, your body aligns, your presence sharpens, and people treat you like someone who matters, not because they investigated your worth, but because you broadcasted it. Let me illustrate this with a modern figure. Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks. He didn't come from wealth. He didn't inherit an empire. He grew up in a housing complex for the poor. But from a young age, he carried himself like someone who would lead. He assumed he was meant to shape something bigger than himself. And as he moved through the business world, people began to believe it. He wasn't waiting for permission. He projected value, and others adjusted accordingly. That's assumption in motion. What's more, we must understand the Stoic distinction between reality and appearance. Epictetus reminded us that most people judge only what is visible. They don't have time to explore your soul. They see your posture, hear your tone, and watch how you react under pressure. If your body whispers, "I don't belong," they listen. But if it declares, "I know who I am," they respect it, even if they disagree with you. Why? Because assumption creates certainty, and in an uncertain world, certainty is currency. Now consider this. Every great figure, at some point, was unproven. Every master began as a nobody, but they did not wait to be crowned. They acted as if the crown had already been placed on their head, not with entitlement, but with intention. That's the key. You don't fake value. You embody it early. You act like someone who knows his own trajectory. And very soon after, the world begins to echo back the same belief. You must understand. People follow momentum, and confidence that stems from assumption creates it. Let's go deeper. Assumption shapes action. If you assume your voice matters, you speak up. If you assume your presence matters, you walk in with composure. If you assume your perspective is valuable, you share it with clarity. But if you assume you're forgettable, you shrink, you soften your opinions, you apologize for existing, and worst of all, you begin to reinforce that identity through behavior. Furthermore, neuroscience supports this. When you hold a dominant pose, even for 2 minutes, testosterone rises and cortisol drops. Your brain begins to associate your stance with internal power. This isn't just philosophy, it's physiology, and that's exactly what Stoicism teaches. What you think, you become. What you assume, you begin to act out. What you repeat, you start to embody. It's not deception, it's design. And in case you think this is about ego, let's clarify something crucial. Stoic assumption is not rooted in comparison. You don't assume you are better than others. You assume that you are enough, that you are worthy of being seen, of being heard, of standing tall. Because you are a human being with logos, a rational spirit capable of reason, responsibility, and virtue. That alone gives you authority, not over others, but over yourself. And when you live from that place, others notice. Think of Eleanor Roosevelt. She was not traditionally beautiful. She was not trained for politics. She had a quiet voice, but she assumed her voice could matter. She assumed her compassion had weight. And she entered rooms full of powerful men as if she had every right to be there. Because she did eventually, they treated her as a moral force, not because she demanded it, but because she assumed it long before anyone else did. Her strength was rooted in moral clarity, not performance, and yet because she embodied it, the performance followed. Let's pause here. Most men are secretly waiting to feel ready, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting for someone else to say, "You're allowed to be powerful now." That moment never comes, because power isn't granted, it's claimed. Not with loudness, not with force, but with presence. An assumption is the seed of that presence. In fact, your assumptions are already shaping you. You assume people won't respect you, and you speak with hesitation. You assume others are more qualified, and you defer before anyone even challenges you. You assume success is for someone else, and your energy leaks that belief. Meanwhile, someone with less intelligence, less skill, and less depth assumes victory, and he moves with boldness, and the world, seeing his certainty, follows. That's the hard truth, not because he's better, but because he believes sooner. So the Stoic response is this: if your life is already being shaped by assumption, why not choose one that serves you? Why not choose the belief that you are capable, prepared, and worthy of being in the arena? Even if it feels uncomfortable at first, even if the results haven't caught up yet, because the assumption is the trigger, the identity follows. In the same way, a great actor becomes the role by committing fully to it. You must become the man you want to be by acting as if you already are. Not by faking, but by aligning your behavior with the vision of your highest self. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." You could replace good with confident, respected, wise. The advice holds: be one. Assume it. Ultimately, the man who assumes strength before he is recognized moves through life with calm certainty, and that certainty becomes his authority. Not because he forced it, but because others began to believe what he already believed. That's how power works, quietly, consistently, from the inside out.
Number 4.
Reputation is repetition. Let me ask you something. What do people really know about you? Not your intentions, not your private thoughts, but your pattern, your posture, your tone, your consistency. Because here's the truth the Stoics understood long before social media turned image into currency. You are not remembered by your potential. You are remembered by your pattern. What you repeat, you become. And what you become, you project. And what you project, that is what the world believes. To begin with, most people live in a kind of identity fog. One day, they speak boldly. The next, they apologize for existing. One moment, they claim they're ready to lead. The next, they seek permission just to speak. And without knowing it, they build a fractured image, one that's too unpredictable to trust. As a result, people step back. Not because they dislike them, but because their signal is unstable. Stoic philosophy teaches us that trust is born not from charisma, but from consistency. Marcus Aurelius put it simply, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Repeated enough times, this becomes not only your inner compass, but your public reputation. For instance, look at someone like Morgan Freeman. He's not loud, he doesn't chase fame, but his tone, his calm, his centered presence over decades has built a reputation of wisdom, not because he told the world he was wise, but because he showed up again and again as if he was. You start to believe someone like him not because of a single interview or one good film, but because he repeats the same energy every time he appears. That's what makes people say, he's the real deal. Reputation is not formed from impact, it's formed from rhythm. Moreover, Epictetus reminded his students, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Why? Because embodiment is repetition made visible. It's what happens when your values have lived in your behavior long enough to become effortless. And that's exactly what people trust. They don't trust who you say you are. They trust the story your presence keeps telling. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time you back down from your values, every time you second-guess your voice, every time you present yourself differently just to please or avoid discomfort, you weaken the reputation you're building. And worse, you teach others to expect inconsistency from you. That's the cost of performative identity. And it's also why truly grounded people feel so rare. Because they've chosen to say, this is who I am, and I will repeat that identity until the world memorizes it. Let's take another example. J.K. Rowling, love her or hate her, she's built an unshakable presence. She didn't just write Harry Potter. She became the writer who writes with moral conviction, who engages her audience directly, who repeats her themes about courage, personal responsibility, and moral clarity across books, interviews, speeches. She didn't invent her identity overnight. She repeated it until it solidified. That's not marketing. That's psychological branding. And that's what you must do, not just in what you say, but in how you move, how you respond, how you carry tension or handle praise. Every micro-interaction is part of your brand, Seneca wrote. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. He wasn't just talking about time, he was talking about attention, about the energy we spend shaping fragments of ourselves, instead of repeating the best version until it sticks. Furthermore, the Stoics would argue that repetition is not just for the public, it's for you. You need to see yourself live the same value again and again, not for applause, but for alignment. When you repeatedly act with courage, you begin to see yourself as brave. When you practice honesty over and over, even when it's difficult, you build self-trust. That repetition becomes the proof, and that proof becomes the identity. That's how you move from theory to transformation. And very soon after, people notice. Not instantly, not dramatically, but slowly, through repetition. Through the way you speak up even when you're nervous. Through the way you pause before reacting. Through the way you don't rush to prove yourself, but quietly radiate presence. Over time, people begin to say, he's solid, He's different, he's clear, and you didn't have to convince them, you just had to be reliable. This is why Stoic discipline is so powerful. It doesn't try to control others. It controls the only thing that matters, your output, and by mastering that, you influence perception without manipulation. You earn a reputation not through effortful charm, but through earned congruence. What people see matches who you are, and that match is rare. That's what makes it magnetic. Let me make this even clearer. Imagine a man who calls himself calm, but every time things get hard, he explodes. Or a man who calls himself humble, but needs to remind you of it every few minutes. Their words and their pattern don't match, and as a result, people don't believe them. Not because they're bad people, but because their signals conflict. But now imagine the opposite. A man who never has to say he's grounded, but you feel it every time he enters a room. That's repetition, that's real influence. Importantly, this doesn't mean perfection. Even the Stoics fell short. But they returned, that's what mattered. They didn't panic when they made mistakes. They corrected course, they repeated their path. That's why Marcus Aurelius journaled. That's why Epictetus gave lectures. That's why Seneca wrote letters. They were repeating the identity they chose, not to boast, but to become. So what's the lesson? Decide what story you want others to believe about you. Then embody that story again and again, until it no longer needs to be explained. Do you want to be seen as calm? Repeat calm. Do you want to be respected? Repeat self-respect. Do you want to lead? Repeat decisive action. And eventually your pattern becomes your presence, and your presence becomes your legacy. To summarize, reputation is not earned in one grand gesture. It is repeated into existence through posture, through silence, through alignment between what you say and what you do. The Stoics didn't try to impress the world. They lived in such a way that the world had no choice but to take them seriously. You can do the same. Choose who you want to be, then live it again and again and again until no one remembers who you used to be because your pattern became too clear to ignore. You've been taught to wait for recognition, wait for validation, wait for the perfect moment to become who you are. But the Stoics never waited. They acted, they aligned, they moved with quiet conviction, knowing that the world responds not to effort alone, but to energy repeated with clarity. So now the truth is yours. Power is not granted. It is assumed. Confidence is not inherited. It is built. And presence is not a performance. It is who you are when you stop seeking permission to exist. So as this video ends, don't just think, decide. Decide how you will walk into your next room. Decide how you will speak your next truth. Decide what energy you will broadcast before a single word leaves your lips. Because once you embody the man you were always meant to be, the world has no choice but to respond. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.